Today we're going to be taking a look at every character's weakness in Injustice 2 Mobile. This video is going to be separated by two different types of characters. Type 1 characters are characters that really shine in one certain area, and because of the way that they're built, they're really vulnerable to specific effects and specific types of damages. Type 2 characters aren't necessarily bad, they're just very vulnerable to any type of damage, that being armor pierce, dot damage, power drain, whatever it is. So needless to say, I'm going to spend a lot more time on Type 1 characters because we need to go a little bit more in depth to understand what kind of damage we need to be using against them. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get started. Starting off the list of Type 1 characters is going to be King of Atlantis AQUAMAN. Aside from being a really strong character overall and having really strong special abilities, you definitely want to use power drain whenever you're fighting King of Atlantis AQUAMAN, because one of his passives makes it so that whenever he dies, he comes back to life according to how many power bars he has. So if you take those power bars away from him, he's not going to come back to life with very much health. Also keep in mind that because of this passive, a lot of people don't really add any sort of health to him, and so pretty much you can use any other effect that you want to fight against him. It's just that power drain, in my opinion, is his biggest weakness. Moving on, now let's talk about Multiverse Armored Supergirl. I also believe that power drain is the best thing to use against her, and it's definitely her biggest weakness. One of the reasons being that her special abilities have a lot of different effects, and these effects are really crucial to making Multiverse Armored Supergirl really OP. If you take that away from her, well, you basically just disabled her. So power drain is definitely her biggest weakness. If you'd like, you can use any other type of damage that you want to use, whether that be armor piercing, dot damage, or whatever. Just don't use reflective shields, because her special 1 goes right through reflective shields and her special 3 makes her immune to reflective shields. Moving on to Justice League CYBORG, he has very strong basic attack hits, and so you definitely want to use a reflective shield whenever you're fighting against him. Basic attack hits are always there. They're always going to be hitting you, and so it's a really good thing to have a reflective shield because you're constantly going to be reflecting that really strong damage back to CYBORG. You can also use whatever other effect you want to fight CYBORG, just don't use stun, as he is immune to stun, and whenever he is targeted by stun, he gains power bars. Moving on, Last Laugh Joker and Heartbreaker Harley Quinn aren't necessarily immune to anything, but they do use stun a lot, especially in arena, to be doing a lot of basic attack damage, and so you definitely want to have a lot of stun resistance whenever you're fighting this team. However, like I said, they're not immune to anything, so you can use whatever you want. However, I do recommend power drain, as some of their special abilities are really strong and do a lot of dot damage. Moving on, Batman Ninja Catwoman has two really great things going for her: her immortal passive and the fact that her special 2 heals her up. Her immortal passive lasts for 9 seconds whenever she's below 15% of health, and so to make those 9 seconds go by really quick, what you could be using is you could be using freeze abilities, or you could be using special abilities that just take a long time to finish. That way you can kill those 9 seconds. In terms of her healing special 2, you can obviously just use power drain to stop that. Moving on, Silver Banshee is pretty much immune to nothing, but because of her status as the damage queen, you definitely want to use power drain so that she doesn't use those really strong special abilities on you, or you can use reflective shield so that you can reflect that damage back to her. Moving on, Multiverse the Flash smacks on tech opponents who try to use their special abilities on him, so you could be using tech opponents with really strong basic attack hits. However, because the Flash is a metahuman, he has class bonus advantages against tech opponents, and so for this character specifically, he's not immune to anything, but try not to use tech characters against him. Moving on, Batman Ninja Robin is actually a pretty strong character in arena, especially since the Batman Ninja team shines on lethal attack hits, and so you definitely want to use reflective shields whenever you're fighting the Batman Ninja team. In addition, Batman Ninja Robin heals on his special 3, and so you definitely want to have power drain so you can stop him from doing that. Moving on, Silver Dr. Fate and Power Girl have very similar passives. They decrease the amount that special abilities cost for their team by 2 bars of power, which means that whenever you're fighting a team with these characters in them, you definitely want to be using characters that increase the amount that opponent's special abilities cost in order to counter their passives. You could also use power drain, however, if you don't time certain things properly, then your opponents are going to continue to use their special abilities, and so if you want to make things a little bit easier, you could just use reflective shields so that way you reflect their damage back to them. Moving on, Black Adam, like Multiverse Armored Supergirl, relies a lot on his special abilities to be doing a lot of effects and a lot of damage, and so if you power drain him, that severely decreases the amount of damage that he's going to do, so power drain is his biggest weakness. Moving on, ATROCITUS is one of the best support characters in the game because of his reflective shield. There's only a couple of things that go right through reflective reflective shields, one of them being dot damage. And there's a lot of characters that do a lot of damage with their dot damage, and so I think that's the biggest weakness for ATROCITUS. Moving on, I'm still going to go in depth with a couple of more characters, but just so I could stop being so repetitive, I'm going to give you a list of a few characters that really rely on their special abilities to be doing a lot of damage or to be having a lot of effects. And so power drain is definitely the way to go. These are the characters: Predator Batman, Atlantean Armored Aquaman, Raiden, Soul Stealer Dr. Fate, Blue Beetle, Sub-Zero, and Classic Batman. Keep in mind that I'm not ranking these characters or saying they do the same amount of damage or anything like that. I'm just saying that their special abilities are something that they really rely on, and so you really want to power drain them. I know I could have said this about a lot of characters, but these characters, they're really straightforward. As long as you power drain them, they can't really do much. With characters like Multiverse Armored Supergirl, again, I said similar things, but for her specifically, I wanted to specifically tell you guys not to use reflective shields because they don't really work against her. Another example would be, for example, the character that I'm going to talk about right now, which is Nightwing. Nightwing is a character that has a lot of different effects on his special abilities, and so using power drain is definitely useful. However, another thing you got to keep in mind is the fact that he generates power whenever he blocks an attack from you. And so one thing you really want to do is you really want to wait for him to do the first move and then attack when he's vulnerable. Anyways, aside from that, he's basically immune to nothing. I just think that power drain is his biggest weakness. Moving on, HELLBOY heals up whenever he's attacked by dot damage, and so that's definitely not his biggest weakness. You can pretty much use anything else. However, because his special 3 is pretty strong and it's also armor piercing, you either want to use power drain or reflective shields. Moving on, Firestorm is a little bit similar. He doesn't heal up from dot damage, but he does reduce the amount of dot damage that he's going to be taking, and so you definitely don't want to be attacking him with that. You can attack him with pretty much everything else. He's not really a strong character, so you don't really need power drain or you don't really need reflective shields. Just do not attack him with dot damage. Moving on, Nightmare Batman has a reflective shield that only works on basic attack hits, and a lot of people like to add a ton of defense and a ton of health to Nightmare Batman, and so I think the best way to go about it is to be using special abilities, but to be using special abilities that have armor piercing and dot damage effects. That way they do that extra damage. Moving on, Justice League Superman has one of the best reflective shields in the game, because not only does it reflect damage, but it also heals him up, and even if you do dot damage, it will also still heal him up. So one of my favorite things to be using against Justice League Superman is really strong basic attack hits. Usually I fight with my League of Anarchy team or my Justice League team, and I've never once had a problem because that's just the best way to beat him, and that's definitely his biggest weakness. Moving on, Horrific Scarecrow has one of the best passives in the game. He increases the amount that special abilities are going to cost for his opponents by 2 power bars. So using characters like Power Girl, Dr. Fate, and Nightwing are definitely the best way to go because they help you get power, which in turn counters Horrific Scarecrow. Moving on, Starfire is one of the best tanks in the game because whenever you attack her with a special ability, she gains health. And so a lot of people like to add a ton of health on her so that way you never kill her. However, one of the best things to be using against her is basic attack hits because obviously basic attack hits don't cost any power bars, which means that she won't be getting any health. Moving on, Shazam is hands down one of the best support characters in the game. He gives his Might and Arcane teammates more attack, and he also makes it so that his special 2 and his special 3 heals up his entire team. So because characters in Shazam's team are going to be doing a ton of damage, you definitely want to have a reflective shield, and also if you can, go ahead and use power drain as well so that way Shazam doesn't heal up any of his teammates. Moving on, Captain Cold is super resistant to critical attack hits, and so if you want to use the Multiverse team, specifically Multiverse Armored Supergirl, so that way you get rid of that resistance, that's really great. However, another thing to be using is lethal attack damage, armor piercing hits, dot damage, pretty much anything else. Just don't rely on your crit hits because they're probably not going to happen too often. Moving on, John Stewart Green Lantern is really resistant to dot damage. However, he's also resistant to a couple of other things, including stun, power drain, and disabled. And since this character can be used both different ways, as a damage dealer or as a tank, using armor piercing hits and reflective shields are really effective against him. Moving on, Silver Superman is very annoying. Not only does he have a reflective shield, but he also has a chance to completely ignore your basic attack hits. And so this is a no-brainer. You definitely want to be using really strong dot damage specials, like for example Multiverse Armored Supergirl Special 1. Moving on, Black Manta does a ton of dot damage whenever he uses one of his special abilities, and he also adds heal block for a certain amount of time so that way you can't heal up and you can't cleanse yourself from the dot damage. And so this is incredibly scary and incredibly dangerous. And so definitely the best thing to be using against Black Manta is power drain so you could stop that from happening. But Black Manta also makes it so that if you don't block his basic attack hits will start to be doing more damage. And so if you want to take the risk, go ahead and use a reflective shield. Just don't use a reflective shield on his special abilities abilities because they will still be doing dot damage to you and they will still heal block you. So definitely 100%, the biggest weakness for Black Mana is power drain for his special abilities. Moving on, Batman Ninja Gorilla Grodd is very strong, and he also has a reflective shield. So one thing that I really like to use against him is dot damage specials, like for example Multiverse Armored Supergirl Special 1. And also, using a reflective shield might not be the worst idea since he does do a lot of lethal attack damage, so you obviously just want to reflect that. Moving on, Multiverse Captain Cold is extremely resistant to a couple of things, some of them being armor piercing hits, freeze, and really strong basic attack damage. And so using special abilities that have really strong dot damage is actually a really good idea since he's not resistant to that at all. Moving on, Multiverse Black Lightning increases the amount that your special abilities are going to cost by 1 power bar every single time that you use it against him or a Multiverse teammate. And so like Horrific Scarecrow, using characters like Power Girl, Dr. Fate, and Nightwing are a really great idea to counter this. Or if you don't want to worry about Black Lightning at all, you can go ahead and use characters that have really strong basic attack damage. Just don't use Power Drain because Multiverse Black Lightning and his teammates will heal up from being targeted by Power Drain. Moving on, Grid is a little bit weird. He gets a lot of bonuses from fighting tech opponents, so you definitely don't want to use tech heroes to fight against Grid. Definitely use somebody else from another class. In addition, whenever he loses 15% of his health over 1 second, he will activate a shield that gives him 200% of his health. However, this does not work for special abilities. It only works whenever he loses a ton of health from basic attack damage, and so you definitely want to be using a character from a different class and pretty much any special ability that you want that's really OP. Moving on, Arkham Knight Batman is extremely tanky. Not only does he give his tech and agility teammates more health and more defense, but also whenever Arkham Knight Batman or any of his teammates knock somebody out, they will get health and power bars. So I'm pretty sure it goes without saying, but as long as you're dealing decent damage and nobody in your team dies, you should be good. However, in terms of effects, I think that because Arkham Knight Batman gives his teammates a lot of health and a lot of defense, using effects like armor piercing and dot damage is actually a really great idea, so he can go right through the defense and do even more damage. In terms of Batman himself, whenever he's targeted by special abilities from a metahuman, he will just completely block it and stun the metahuman instead. So you definitely don't want to be using metahuman heroes whenever you're fighting Arkham Knight Batman. But aside from that, he's not really immune to anything else, so you can go ahead and use any type of damage that you want. Moving on, DARKSEID is incredibly tanky, and because of his barrier that pretty much blocks any sort of damage coming his way, it severely reduces the amount of damage that you're going to be doing, and it also slows down the battle. But not only that, DARKSEID is actually pretty strong as well, and so the only advice that I could give you on how to beat DARKSEID, honestly, is have a really great tank and make sure to be doing as much damage as you possibly can. But on top of that, I really like using Power Drain because I don't want him to spawn a Parademon, because whenever you kill somebody in the battle, DARKSEID gains health, and so I try to prevent that as much as possible. But also his special abilities are strong as well, and so Power Drain is just the best way to go about it. But again, and I can't stress this enough, have a really good tank and do a lot of damage. That's the only way you're going to beat this guy. He might not be immune to anything, but because he's so tanky, chipping away at his health is just the best way to go about it, and power draining him and stopping him from doing a ton of damage is just the best way to go about it. Moving on, I'm going to talk about two characters in the same team, and that's going to be Suicide Squad Harley Quinn and Suicide Squad Enchantress. Now, honestly, it's really hard to understand what these characters are really good at, especially if you go to their description, because there's just so many things going on. However, I have fought the Suicide Squad team a couple of times, and the number one problem that I always face is their healing factor. And there's two different ways that I like to deal with it. Number one is burning of Multiverse Armored Supergirl Special 1, because it gets rid of any sort of crit resistance that they might have, and so it allows me to perform really strong specials really quickly. And the next thing that I also like to be using is really strong basic attack damage. Typically, I will be using the Justice League team to fight this team, because not only do they do a lot of basic attack damage, but also if you have Aquaman, it will be doing armor piercing, and if you have the Flash, it will be doing extra fast attack hits. I know that the healing factor only applies for Harley Quinn, but it also applies for Suicide Squad Enchantress whenever she's on her team, and usually those two characters are paired up, and it's no joke, man. Their healing factor is insane. They will be healing up incredibly quickly, and so speed is everything. You could be using power drain, you could be using reflective shields, you could be using dot damage, but it's not fast enough. You need to have strength, and having really strong basic attack hits and getting rid of crit resistance is, in my opinion, the best way to go about it. Moving on, the final character that I'm going to go in depth with is Multiverse Supergirl. She gives her multiverse teammates defense, and whenever they reach 50% of their health, they will be taking 50% less damage. We can't really do anything about that, but we can do something about the defense. Obviously, you want to be using dot damage and armor piercing effects, so that way they deal that extra damage and go right through the defense. Alright, that's pretty much it when it comes to type 1 characters. Now we're going to talk talk about type 2 characters. Like I said earlier, type 2 characters aren't necessarily bad characters, they're just not immune to anything, and so pretty much everything is their weakness. And because of this, I don't really have to go in depth when I'm talking about these characters, so I'm just going to go ahead and list them. Here's the list: Silver Deadshot, Silver Harley Quinn, Silver Scarecrow, Silver Flash, Silver Swamp Thing, Silver Black Canary, Silver Aquaman, Silver Cyborg, Silver Robin, Silver Joker, Silver Catwoman, Silver Bane, Silver Batman, Suicide Squad Deadshot, Silver Green Arrow, Primal Swamp Thing, Silver Green Lantern, Batman Ninja Harley Quinn, Sonic Black Canary, Enraged Bane, Batwoman, White Canary, Unbreakable Cyborg, Flora Poison Ivy, Dark Supergirl, Batman Ninja Lord Joker, Speed Force the Flash, Unhinged Harley Quinn, Master Thief Catwoman, Blade Master Robin, Red Hood, Batman Ninja Batman, Multiverse Green Arrow, Justice League Batman, Justice League Flash, Justice League Aquaman, Powered Supergirl, Classic Superman, Entangling Poison Ivy, Emerald Green Lantern, Reverse Flash, Cheetah, and finally Brainiac. Again, these characters aren't necessarily bad characters, especially some of them if you pair them up with their team, like for example Justice League Flash and Justice League Aquaman, they could be pretty good. However, they're not really the shining part of their team, it would be Justice League Cyborg. And I already explained how to beat Justice League Cyborg, so I feel like I would have just repeated myself if I said the same thing, because basically you can beat them with reflective shields as well, just like you would with Cyborg. Speaking of reflective shields, I didn't mention a couple of characters. These characters being Warrior Queen Wonder Woman, Armored Superman, Mythic Wonder Woman, Telekinetic Gorilla Grodd, Amazon Wonder Woman, Silver Wonder Woman, and Silver Gorilla Grodd. These characters, I would also classify them as type 2 characters, because if it wasn't for the reflective shields, they would pretty much be weak to everything. But because they do have reflective shields, the best thing to be using is obviously dot damage or power drain, so that way they don't have any power to use their reflective shields. Anyways guys, that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys later. Stay safe and stay clean, and thank you for watching.